The annual Shengtian Group banquet was held in the largest ballroom of the Marriott Hotel. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the space in brilliant gold. By the time the wine had made its third round, Zhao Tianxiong's face was flushed red. He stood on stage gripping the microphone, one hand in his pocket, relaxed, as if in his own living room. The logistics division did well this year. He said, swaying the mic, overall growth is average, but steady. And we have Comrade He Jiangwo to thank for that. 12 years, day in and day out, diligent and dedicated. Scattered applause rippled through the room. I sat at my table, and the person next to me clapped my shoulder with a grin. I picked up my water glass and took a sip, not rising. Zhao Tianxiong raised his glass toward me from the stage, wearing that knowing smile. But let me be honest, he continued, his tone shifting. Comrade He Jiangwo's biggest problem. He's too steady. 12 years. From entry-level to logistics supervisor. Not one step up. Is he incompetent? No, he does okay. Does he have ambition? Never seen him fight for anything. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you call that? Someone called out. A turd that won't stick to the wall. Laughter erupted. The tech director at my table was doubled over, pointing at me. Zhao Tianxiong laughed too, drunk and swaying, pointing in my direction. He Jiangwo. Tell us today, do you have any ambition at all? If you've got spine, you'll quit tomorrow and go make something of yourself. If you don't have the guts, don't blame me for speaking harshly. Your position here, it's honestly expendable. The lights hit my face. The polished silverware on the table reflected a blinding glare. I held my water glass, the warmth of my palm seeping into the ceramic. People were still laughing. Someone even pulled out their phone and snapped a picture. I said nothing. I just smiled. The banquet ended after 9. I stood outside the hotel waiting for my designated driver. The night wind was cool against my face, carrying away the smell of alcohol clinging to my clothes. The driver was a young guy. He glanced at my work badge and said, Bro, you work at Shengtian. Big company. Good place. I didn't respond. I got into the back seat. The car drove past the bustling commercial district. Neon lights slid past the window in streaks of red and green, illuminating my face before fading to shadow. I got home around 10:30. I fished out my keys and unlocked the door. The living room light was still on. 7-year-old He Xiaoman sat cross-legged on the sofa, reading a picture book. She looked up when she heard the door. Daddy. Her eyes were round, her hair in 2 pigtails, one higher than the other, probably tied by grandma. I walked over and crouched down. She held up her book. This rabbit stole a carrot. But it knew it was wrong. Did you forgive it, huh? She nodded, then tilted her head. Daddy, were you happy tonight? Was the party fun? I patted her head. It was okay. But you don't look happy. Her eyes were bright, studying my face carefully. Did someone bully you? I paused, then laughed and scooped her up. No, Daddy's just a little tired. She wrapped her arms around my neck, her warm breath soft and sweet against my ear. I carried her to the bedroom. Grandma had already washed up and was sitting on the edge of the bed folding clothes. She nodded at me when I came in. I laid Xiaoman down and tucked her in. She fell asleep quickly, her lips slightly parted, the long lashes resting on her cheeks. I stepped out, gently closing the door behind me. I stood in the living room for a while. It was very quiet. The wall clock ticked steadily. I went into the bedroom and pulled out the old suitcase I'd used for over a decade from the top of the closet. The handle was worn smooth, the zipper a little stiff. I'd never replaced it. I opened it and set it on the bed, starting to pack. Folded shirts, a jacket, 2 sets of underwear from the drawer. Grandma appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. Her wrinkles deepened in the lamplight. Jiangwo, what are you doing? Nothing, Mom. I didn't turn around. Just organizing things. She walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, watching me. Her thin hands rested on her knees, patting them gently. After a long moment, she said, Jiangwo, I know they've been giving you a hard time at work. If you want to leave, I support you. I can take care of Xiaoman. Don't worry. My hands paused, a half-folded sweater gripped between my fingers, soft, warm fabric. I didn't turn to face her. Mom, I'm not leaving. I'm going to take back what Dad left behind. She was quiet for a while. Then she stood, walked behind me, and patted my back. Her hand was light, but warm. The iron box at the back of the closet. Your father left it. Find some time to open it. She left, closing the door behind her. I was alone with the open suitcase. I put the sweater in, closed the lid, zipped it up, and set it against the wall. Then I walked to the closet and opened the door, reaching to the very back. My fingers touched something cold and hard, a rectangular iron box, its lock rusted. I pulled it out and set it on the bed. I tried the small key on my keychain, the one I'd never used. Click. It opened. Inside was a stack of yellowed paper. On top, a handwritten agreement that its corners so brittle they might crumble at a touch. I unfolded it carefully. The first line made me read it 3 times before I was sure I wasn't mistaken. Sheng Tian Group co-founder equity confirmation. He Deming. Shareholding. 35%. Below. In smaller print. Transfer Zhao Tianxiong agrees to pay consideration of 30,000 yuan to acquire the above shares by the end of 1998. This agreement serves as proof. Below that. Signatures. My father's name written neatly. T. Deming. Stroke by stroke. Next to it, Zhao Tianxiong's signature. Bold and flamboyant. The same hand that had gestured so freely on stage tonight. Consideration. 30,000 yuan. End of 1998. Never paid. My hands trembled as I held the paper. Outside. The night was deep. Occasionally a car passed, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling through the curtain gap. At the bottom of the iron box were a few more things. A photo of my father as a young man with another man, both standing at the entrance of a dilapidated factory, arms around each other's shoulders, laughing. A handwritten draft titled On Strategic Divergences in Sheng Tian Group's Development, and a bank receipt showing a transfer of 30,000 yuan to an account in 1999, but with a memo reading friendly loan, not equity consideration. I examined each item carefully. It then placed them neatly back in the iron box and closed the lid. I sat on the edge of the bed, images surging through my mind. My father died when I was 19. At his bedside, he held my hand, his lips moving, trying to say something. But by then, he had no voice left. His finger traced shapes on my palm. I was too young, too panicked, I couldn't understand. Now I remembered he was writing the character for box. That iron box had lain in the closet for 20 years. Today, when Zhao Tianxiong told me on stage to have the spine to quit, it was 5 feet away behind one layer of wood. My phone lit up. Someone in the work group chat had posted a video clip from the banquet. I opened it. On screen, Zhao Tianxiong drunk pointed at me while the room roared with laughter. The camera swept over my face. He Jiang Wo expressionless, sitting like a silent stump. I closed the video and set the phone down. I stood. Walked to the suitcase by the wall. Crouched. And reopened it. I took out each item of clothing. Folded it. And put it back in the closet. The suitcase. Now empty. I folded and slid back to the top shelf. The iron box went into the nightstand drawer. Locked. The key in my pocket. Tomorrow. I'd still go to work. But I wouldn't sit there and let them laugh again, Dad. I've received what you left me. What you never got back. I'll go get it for you. I got up at 6 the next morning as usual. I warmed Xiaomon's milk, fried an egg. And laid out the dress she'd wear today at the foot of her bed. She sat up, groggily, rubbing her eyes, then padded barefoot to the bathroom to brush her teeth. With the toothbrush in her mouth, she mumbled half a nursery rhyme. Forgot the third line. And looked up at me. Daddy. How does the rest go? Little swallow. Wears a flowery coat. Oh right. Comes here every spring. I set breakfast on the table. She climbed onto her chair and started eating. Tearing toast into little pieces with egg yolk on them. Grandma came out of the kitchen with a bowl of congee. Glanced at me. And said nothing. When I left, she waved from inside the doorway. Coming back for dinner? Yeah. She nodded and didn't ask more. At the office just after 8. The logistics department was already half full. I walked to my desk. Booted up. And opened yesterday's reports. A few keystrokes. My colleague Zhao Wei leaned over and whispered, "Hey, don't let last night's banquet get to you. Zhao was drunk. You know how he gets. It's fine." I didn't look up. He gave me a hesitant look and pulled back. At lunch. I went to the cafeteria. As soon as I sat down with my tray. A woman in a black skirt suit approached and handed me a manila envelope. Mr. Zhao asked me to give you this. He said he'd like it processed today. She left. Her heels clicking crisply on the floor. I set down my chopsticks and opened the envelope. Inside was a single A4 sheet that headed with the words, "Voluntary resignation application." The form was already filled out. My name. Employee ID. Start date. Only the signature line was blank. At the bottom. HR stamp. I folded the form back into the envelope and slid it into my drawer. That afternoon. There was a meeting. Zhao Tianxiong wasn't there. Logistics Director Wang Lei, who'd been brought in from outside last year, chaired it instead. He was mediocre at business, but excellent at reading the room. Throughout the meeting. He kept glancing my way. When it ended, he walked up beside me, feigning concern. Mr. He, you should take care of Mr. Zhao's matters soon. Between you and me, he's tough on the outside but soft on the inside. If you show the right attitude, he won't make it too hard on you. I looked at him, remembering last month, when he'd snatched a project I'd been managing and given it to his own man. When I confronted him, he'd said, "Don't be so petty. It's about the company's overall interests." Now, tough on the outside but soft on the inside meant I should bow my head and beg Zhao Tianxiong for mercy. Director Wang. I neatly stacked the papers on my desk. "I'll handle it." He must have thought I'd seen reason. He patted my shoulder and walked away. I stood alone in the empty conference room, gazing at the gray sky beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. In the distance, the Shengtian headquarters tower rose through the haze. The top floor, with its largest windows, was Zhao Tianxiong's office. 20 years ago, when he'd posed with my father in front of that shabby factory, he probably never imagined he'd one day sit behind those windows, but trying to dismiss his old partner's son with a single form. After work, I went to old son's house. He was in his 70s now, retired, living in an old neighborhood south of the city. He kept a mynah bird and walked it on the balcony every day. I brought a bag of fruit. He opened the door, paused when he saw me, then stepped aside. "Xiaohe, you're a rare guest, Uncle Sunday. I need to ask you something." I handed him a copy of the agreement from the iron box. He put on his reading glasses and sat on the couch, scrutinizing the yellowed paper for a good 10 minutes. He stood up once to smoke on the balcony. When he came back, he took off his glasses, his expression far more serious. "This agreement, it's real." He tapped the paper. "Back then, your father and Zhao Tianxiong started the company together. Your father brought the tech and the model. Zhao brought the capital and the space. 35% original stake, no doubt about it. In 98, Zhao wanted to consolidate equity and push your father out. They discussed 3 plans and settled on this 1.30,000 to buy out your father's entire share, paid by the end of 98. But later, your father told me Zhao transferred the money with the memo marked personal loan, refusing to confirm it as equity consideration. I saw the receipt. I said, 30,000. Marked friendly loan. Old son leaned back with a long sigh. Your father was furious, but what could he do? The company was built by both of them, step by step. He couldn't bear to make a scene, and he couldn't bring himself to beg. A few years later, his health failed, and the matter was left unresolved. Xiaohe, your father passed too soon. On his deathbed, he mentioned it to me once. He said, Zhang Wo is still young. Don't tell him. Let him live his life. I clenched the teacup in my hands. Its warmth seeped through the thin ceramic, stinging my fingertips. Uncle Sunday. In your opinion, does this agreement still hold legal weight? Old son was quiet for a long moment. In principle, if the consideration for an equity transfer wasn't paid as agreed, the transfer is invalid. Since Zhao Tianxiong's payment was labeled a loan, it can't be legally recognized as equity consideration. But it's been 20 years that many things have changed. Dilution, capital increases, secondary market transactions. It's complicated. Xiaohe, if you want to go this route, I'd recommend finding a solid lawyer for a full evidence verification. I nodded, stood, and thanked him. At the door, he patted my shoulder. Xiaohe, you look just like your father. Once, when we were drinking together, he told me something. He said Zhao Tianxiong was good at everything except owning up to his debts. 20 years later, nothing's changed. The street was dark when I left. My shadow stretched long under the streetlights. My phone buzzed. Grandma. Xiaoman ate 2 bowls of rice. Watching cartoons now. Coming back. I replied. Coming. Picking up some osmanthus cakes on the way. I rode a shared bike through the narrow alleys of the old city, stopping at the decades-old pastry shop to buy a box. When I got home, Xiaoman was already sprawled on the couch watching TV. Grandma sat beside her, knitting. Needles clicking softly. I set the osmanthus cakes on the coffee table. Xiaoman pounced with a cheer. Tearing open the box. I watched her eat. Crumbs clinging to her lips, wiping them with the back of her hand before reaching for another piece. Grandma looked up from her knitting, her lips moving as if to speak. In the end, she only said, Don't let her eat too many. Too much sugar. I know. Mom. That night, after Xiaoman fell asleep, I sat alone on the old couch. The alley outside had gone quiet. Streetlight filtered through the half-drawn curtains, spreading a thin layer of warm yellow across the floor. I pulled out the resignation form and smoothed it on the coffee table. Under the light, the blank signature line glared white. I picked up a pen, the tip hovering over the paper. Then I set it down. I turned the page over. On the blank reverse side, I wrote one line. I am not resigning. I am taking back what belongs to my father. I folded the paper back into the envelope and slid it into the nightstand drawer alongside the iron box. The drawer closed with a click. I returned to the living room. Poured out the cold tea. Washed the cup. And put it away. At the bedroom door. I glanced at Xiaomon's room. A sliver of warm light seeped through the crack. She'd probably turned her lamp back on. I pushed the door open gently. Sure enough, she was curled up under the covers. Picture book in hand. The moment she saw me, she shoved it under her pillow. Squeezed her eyes shut and pretended to sleep. I smiled, pulled the book from under her pillow, placed it on the nightstand. And dimmed the lamp. Sleep. You have school tomorrow. She cracked one eye open. Daddy, you smiled when you came home today. Happier than yesterday, yeah? I gently touched her forehead. Tomorrow will be even happier. She rolled over, hugging the corner of her blanket. And soon her breathing evened out. I stood in the doorway watching her for a while, then gently closed the door. I walked to the living room window. The night was deep. The old city had no high-rises to block the view. I could see the faint blue ring of light atop the Shangtian headquarters in the distance, glimmering on the horizon. 20 years, Zhao Tianxiu. I'm holding you to this account. The lawyer old son recommended was a woman named Fong. Mid-40s, short-haired, sharp. She practiced at a firm specializing in commercial disputes. We met at a cafe near her office. I laid out all the original documents from the iron box on the table. Attorney Fong went through them carefully, taking over a dozen photos with her phone and filling several pages of notes. She set the materials aside after reading the last page. I'll start with my conclusion. Your claim to the original equity has sufficient legal support. The key question is the nature of the 30,000 yuan payment. Your father's receipt labels it as a loan. Correct? Yes. I handed her the copy of the bank receipt. She looked at it and nodded. This receipt is crucial evidence. If the money was a loan, then the consideration for the equity transfer was never actually paid. In other words, your father he Deming only transferred operational control of the equity to Zhao Tianxiong. He never completed a legal transfer of ownership. Under corporate law, the court can revisit the attribution of this equity. She pushed the materials back to me. Her face serious. But I need to warn you. This case will be complicated. First, the time span is too long. There have been multiple rounds of capital increases. And the original equity ratio has long been diluted. Second, Shangtian is now a publicly traded company. So public investor interests are involved. Any equity claim will have broad implications. Third, she paused. Zhao Tianxiong has deep political and business connections locally. He'll use every resource he has to pressure you. Are you ready for that? I gathered the documents one by one back into the file bag and zipped it up. Attorney Fong. I've been ready for 20 years. When my father passed, he didn't get to settle this account. Now I'm settling it for him. Attorney Fong studied me for a few seconds, then pulled out her phone to scroll through her contacts. All right, I'll refer you to a colleague specializing in public company equity disputes. He's handled similar cases. Bring all your materials to his office next week for a full evidentiary review. I nodded, thanked her, and stood to leave. As I pushed the door, she called after me. Mr. He. I turned. If your father were here to see this, he'd be proud. I said thank you and walked out into the winter sun. The afternoon wasn't too cold. Pedestrians hurried past in thick coats. I stood at the intersection, waiting for the light to change, feeling something slowly rise inside me. Like a weight submerged for too long, finally breaking its tether, I kept going to work as usual. Reports, emails, the boring weekly meetings. Zhao Wei pestered me about whether I'd signed the resignation. I said I was still thinking, and he gave me that I knew it look. Wang Lei didn't press me directly, but every time we passed in the hall, his eyes said, I've given you time. Think it over. I didn't care. I clocked in. Attended meetings. Wrote reports. More carefully than before. Every logistics plan I handled got extra scrutiny. Every number checked to 2 decimal places. Wang Lei thought I was trying to leave on a high note. He had no idea what I was actually playing at. During those weeks I did several things. First, I went through all of my father's old work notebooks. Yellowed pages. Recording the early logistics system designs for Shangtian. Warehouse layouts. Transport routing. Data management processes. My father had built the whole framework. In one notebook that I found a system architecture diagram signed, He Deming / June 1997. Arrows and module connections covered the page. 20 years later, Sheng Tian's logistics operations still ran on the blueprint he'd drawn. Second, I started tracking Zhao Tianxiong's moves. Financial news regularly mentioned Sheng Tian. Their biggest move in the past 6 months was planning to spin off the logistics division for an independent IPO, targeting $3 billion in funding. I reviewed the public draft prospectus. It cited patents for an intelligent logistics management system, filed a year earlier with inventors listed as Zhao Tianxiong and several current executives. But I scoured every technical appendix and found no original design documentation predating my father's architecture. Third, I had someone check Zhao Tianxiong's related party transactions through public records. In the past 3 years, Sheng Tian had signed contracts with several suppliers for unusually large amounts. And those suppliers all shared the same building, same floor. I took screenshots and filed them away. 2 weeks later, Attorney Chun, the colleague Attorney Fong had referred me to, gave me a preliminary legal opinion. The conclusion was restrained, but I could read the confidence behind it. Based on the available evidence that the applicant He Jiangwo has a legal basis for his claim to the original Sheng Tian Group equity, it is recommended to initiate formal legal proceedings and file an equity confirmation lawsuit. I placed the opinion letter on the nightstand next to the iron box that I stood by the window. The winter evening fell early in the old city. Dark by 5. Someone was walking a dog downstairs. Leash jangling. In the distance, Sheng Tian's blue ring of light glowed again. Circling the tower top, I pulled out my phone and called Old Sunday Uncle Sunday. I've decided to go ahead. A few seconds of silence. Then Old Sun's voice came through. A little shaky. Xiaohe, if your father, Uncle Sunday, tell me the truth. When Dad passed, was it partly because of this? Another long silence. Then a long sigh. Your father, you know what he was like. He kept everything bottled up. Those promises Zhao made he never told anyone. Not even your mother. But whenever it came up, the look on his face. Xiaohe, that business ate away at your father. Slowly, I gripped the phone. My fingertips white. Outside, the wind scraped along the old building's wall. A low moan, like someone calling from far away. Uncle Sunday. I understand. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Xiaoman's laughter drifted in from the other room, bright as bells. I stood up, walked to the living room, and looked at the two figures on the couch. Grandma knitting, Xiaoman on her lap, eyes fixed on the cartoon on screen. Mom. I said, I want to talk to you about something. She looked up. Dad's shares from back then. I'm going to sue to get them back. Grandma's knitting needles stopped. She looked at me. Her wrinkles trembling slightly. Then she put her needles down in the basket. After a long moment, she spoke. Your father mentioned it to me once. Said Zhao Tianxiong owed him something. I asked what. He said, never mind. She looked up. Eyes slightly red. If you can settle this for him, I'll have no regrets in this life. Xiaoman didn't understand. She looked from Grandma to me. Then tugged my sleeve. Daddy. Who are you suing? I crouched down to her eye level. Someone who bullied Grandpa. Is he bad? Yeah, pretty bad. She tilted her head. Thinking. Then patted my hand. Then go, Daddy. I support you. I squeezed her little cheek and stood. Grandma wiped her eyes and picked up her knitting again. Muttering, this girl's getting more and more clever. The cartoon kept playing. Colorful images flickering on the wall, cheerful music mixing with the wind outside. I went out to the balcony. The night wind carried winter's chill. I rubbed my hands together and looked at the blue ring of light in the distance. Zhao Tianxiong. When you told me to sign that resignation form, you probably thought I'd be as easy to push out as my father was. He stepped back. He didn't fight you. He left. But 20 years later, his son is back, with the blueprint he drew, with those papers he kept in the closet for 20 years, with the breath he swallowed, I'm not leaving. You are. For the next month, I live like a normal person. Work. Commute. Pick Xiaoman up from school. Take her to the park on weekends. I even showed a convincing weariness to my colleagues. Like the weight of considering resignation was wearing me down. Wang laid out, seeing my state. Relaxed noticeably. Once. He even said in a meeting. If you've made up your mind. Go ahead and process it. I'll put in a good word for you with Mr. Zhao. I said, okay, Director Wang. I'll think about it. With downcast eyes and a deferential tone. Behind the scenes. I was working through the lawyer's checklist. Attorney Chun had initiated a formal request for the original equity registration documents. I provided my father's death certificate and notarized kinship documents and the full set of 2-decade-old agreements and receipts. Attorney Fong's economic law expert prepared a dilution ratio report. The conclusion was more optimistic than I'd expected. Despite multiple rounds of dilution based on the original transfer's invalidity, the path to retroactive restitution was legally viable. I also took a weekend off that drove to the address Old Son had given me, the site of Sheng Tian's first warehouse. The factory had long been torn down. It was now a vacant lot overgrown with weeds that surrounded by rusted chain-link fence. I stood outside the fence looking at that empty space. Winter grass was yellow and brown, rustling in the wind. 20-some years ago, my father and Zhao Tianxiong had started here. One with tech, the other with money, sitting on the concrete floor drawing blueprints until late. Next to the fence stood an old locust tree, so thick 2 people couldn't wrap their arms around it. I stood under it for a while. Took a few photos with my phone. Just empty land and a tree. But I knew this tree had seen everything that happened in that little factory beneath it. On the way back, I passed Sheng Tian headquarters and stopped. The security guard glanced at me. Didn't say anything. I was still in work clothes, wearing my badge. I walked into the lobby and stood before the big corporate history wall. There was an old black and white photo. 2 young men standing at the entrance of a worn-out warehouse, arms around each other, laughing. Zhao Tianxiong on the left, leaner, with a bright ambition in his eyes. My father on the right, in that old jacket I'd later found in the iron box, smiling warmly. I stood before that photo for a long time. A female employee walked past with a coffee. Glanced at me. Probably thinking I was just touring the corporate culture display. I took a picture of the photo. Then I turned and left. As I pushed through the revolving door, the sunlight slanted in from the glass, bright and blinding. I squinted and walked out. During that time, I also kept track of Zhao Tianxiong's moves. The spin-off IPO was moving fast. Roadshow materials were being prepared. The PR department had put out several press releases with titles like Sheng Tian Logistics leads the new trend in smart supply chains. The technical data quoted in the releases looked familiar. The basic parameters of those data models were identical to those in my father's notebooks, just wrapped in trinier jargon. Attorney Chen called one Friday afternoon. The court had approved the materials. The equity confirmation lawsuit had been formally filed. Next step, serving legal documents to Sheng Tian Group and Zhao Tianxiong personally. Under procedure, they had 15 days to respond. Mr. Attorney Chen said evenly after the documents are served that they'll know what you're doing. Then all kinds of pressure will come. Be mentally prepared. What kind of pressure? All kinds. Soft. Hard. People might come to negotiate. People might come to check on your work situation. People might try to make your life difficult through various channels. Mr. Stay steady. I can stay steady, I said. After hanging up, I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The office was empty. The neighboring cubicles had all gone home. In the hallway, a cleaner's mop scraped faintly. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling, mentally mapping out the next steps. The next day was the weekend. I took Xiaoman to her mother's grave. Her mother had passed suddenly when Xiaoman was 3. Too fast for me to process. Ever since I'd taken Xiaoman every Qingming and on her birthday. We went a little early this year, because I knew the coming days might be too chaotic to make the trip. The cemetery lay at the foot of the hills. The winter pines were dark green. Xiaoman placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums before the headstone and crouched to touch the name carved there. Daddy, she asked, is Mommy doing well over there? She must be so happy to see how tall you've grown. She stood up, brushed the dirt off her hands, and took mine. Let's go home, Daddy. I want Grandma's sweet and sour ribs. I held her small hand and walked back along the cemetery path. Sunlight filtered through the pine branches, breaking into scattered patches of gold on the ground. The cemetery gate. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Zhangwo. This is Zhao Tianxiong's special assistant. Zhao? Mr. Zhao would like to have dinner with you Monday evening. Private. Would that work? I stood on the steps at the cemetery entrance, looking at the city's silhouette in the distance. Sure. Send me the time and place. Will do. See you then. After I hung up, Xiaoman looked up at me. Who was that? Daddy. A man. Inviting me to dinner. Are you going? Yeah? I slipped the phone back in my pocket and took her hand. Walking on. Some dinners that you have to go. The Monday dinner was at a private club. After I arrived, I was led into a private room decorated in an old-fashioned style, the calligraphy on the walls that a tea set on the table. Zhao Tianxiong was already there, seated in the main chair, wearing a dark gray cashmere sweater. He poured water into a teacup, relaxed. He didn't stand when I came in, just gestured to the seat across. Sit. I sat. He pushed a cup of tea toward me. He Jiangwo. I've heard about your moves lately. Mr. Zhao's sources are fast. Not really, but I hear things. He lifted the cup to his lips, took a sip, and set it down. I heard you hired a lawyer. Looking into some old company files. I also heard you found something your father left behind. He looked at me directly, his gaze steady. He Jiangwo. About your father, to be honest, that situation wasn't handled well back then. We were young, the company was new, a lot of things weren't done properly. I did owe your father an explanation regarding his shares, but it's been 20 years. The company's grown big. You've been in this system for 12 years. Tell me straight, what do you really want? We can sit down and talk. I picked up the tea and took a sip. It was scalding, burning from my tongue down my throat. I swallowed slowly, letting the heat spread. Mr. Zhao. I set the cup down. When my father passed, did you go to his funeral? He froze. No, you didn't. Before he died, he told my mother one thing. His biggest regret was trusting the wrong person. Mr. Zhao, I'm not here to negotiate with you. When you transferred that 30,000 to my father, you marked it as a loan, right? Zhao Tianxiong's expression shifted slightly, just a flicker. But I caught it. That money is still recorded as a debt under my father's name. I checked the bank records. I continued. The consideration for the equity transfer was never actually paid. Legally, the transfer never happened. Mr. Zhao, I'm taking back what my father is owed. If you want to talk, we'll talk in court. Zhao Tianxiong leaned back, the easy smile gone. He stared at me for a long time, then let out a quiet laugh. He Jiangwo. You're tougher than your father. Fine. You want to sue? I won't stop you. But I need to warn you that your father was tough like that too. And what happened? I built this company. I negotiated the supply chains. I built the connections. You're coming at me with a piece of paper from 20 years ago that you won't win. He pulled an envelope from under the table and slid it toward me. Inside is a check for $2 million. Call it compensation for your father. Drop the lawsuit. Take the money. Raise your daughter properly. That's better than anything. He Jiangwo. Think carefully. I looked at the envelope on the table. Thick. The corner of the check was visible through the opening. I didn't move. Mr. Zhao. When my father passed, he left me one thing. What are they saying? He said, a man must honor his debts. I stood up, leaving the half-drunk tea on the table. I turned and walked out of the private room. Behind me, a long silence, then the sharp crack of a teacup hitting the table. The door closed behind me. The hallway lights were bright. I walked down the corridor, my pace quickening. At the elevator, I pressed the down button. The elevator doors reflected my face, calm as still water. Zhao Tianxiong. That $2 million check is the interest you've owed my father for 20 years. The principal. I won't take a cent less. The elevator arrived. I stepped in and pressed the first floor. As the doors closed, I watched the numbers descend. 19.18.17. The tea in that private room was still warm. But I wouldn't be going back. After the court summons was served to Tian Group, the entire company's atmosphere shifted. First, Wang Lei's attitude. At Monday's department meeting, he suddenly raised his voice in public, saying certain people should know their place, that the company had treated them well. He kept glancing my way as he said it. Zhao Wei shrank in his seat. Other colleagues pretended to read documents. I didn't look up, just kept taking notes like I hadn't heard. Then HR adjusted my workstation permissions. My computer password was reset once. One morning, my access card suddenly wouldn't open the logistics area door. I went to HR and asked. The girl smiled and said it was a system glitch. Mr. He. Please wait. Taking 20 minutes to reactivate it. These little moves were minor. But the message was clear. You're being pushed out. Colleagues changed how they greeted me too. Instead of mourning, most just nodded and hurried past. Like they were afraid of catching something. A few gave me longer looks. Curious. Uncertain. I didn't blame them. In Zhao Tianxiong's company, who would get too close to the boss's enemy. I did my job. Clocked and handled emails. Finished my work. Once, Wang Lei tried to peek at my screen from behind. I smoothly switched to a report page. He stood for 2 seconds and walked away. The real drama came at the monthly executive meeting, Wednesday. The conference room was full. Department heads from every division. A row of water glasses and folders lined the long table. Zhao Tianxiong sat at the head. A few documents spread before him. The first half of the meeting was department performance reports. When logistics came up, Wang Lei stood and rattled off numbers, emphasizing the department's overall stability, noting that one individual's performance required attention. As he said one individual, his gaze swept toward me. When the reports ended, Zhao Tianxiong didn't immediately wrap up. He twisted the cap on his pen, scanned the room, and fixed his eyes on me. The room went quiet. The hum of the air conditioner became deafening. He Jiangwo. Zhao Tianxiong's tone was calm, but layered with unyielding authority. Your resignation form has been sitting in my office for over a month. You keep saying you're thinking. Today, I in front of everyone, give me a straight answer. Are you signing it or not? Every eye in the room was on me. I could feel the weight of those gazes. Some watchful, some anxious for me, some waiting for me to embarrass myself. Wang Lei sat sideways, a faint smirk on his lips, like someone waiting for a show with a known ending. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Mr. Zhao, you've been pushing me to sign. You deserve an answer. I reached into my briefcase. Wang Lei's expression brightened. He probably thought I was pulling out the resignation to sign. Someone nearby inhaled softly. Someone else looked down at their phone, maybe ready to record the moment I finally left. What I pulled out wasn't a resignation form. It was a set of court summons copies and the equity confirmation petition. 3 copies in black and white stamped with the court's red seal. I placed them on the table and slid them forward. Mr. Zhao, this is the court's acceptance notice and summons for the Shengtian Group equity confirmation lawsuit. I am the plaintiff. He Jiangwo. Representing my father, he Deming, seeking the return of the 35% original equity he held at Shengtian's founding. Additionally, I pulled out another document. This is a dilution calculation report prepared by an accounting firm. Based on Shengtian's current market value, the present equity corresponding to that 35% is approximately $7.3 billion. The conference room might as well have been paused. Wang Lei's smirk froze. He stared at the summons for 3 seconds, then whipped his head toward Zhao Tianxiong. Zhao Tianxiong sat at the head of the table, as confident, a controlling smile frozen into an immobile mask. His fingers pressed against the tabletop, their tips pale. Mr. Zhao, when you told me to resign, you said if I had spine I should go out and make something of myself. I met his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. After I take back what belongs to my father, I'll leave on my own terms, and no need for you to worry about it. Low murmurs rippled around the table. Someone checked their phone, probably searching for the name he Deming. Someone stood up as if to leave, then was pulled back by a neighbor. Wang Lei's face went from red to white. His lips moved, but nothing came out. Zhao Tianxiong slowly rose. He was half a head taller than me. Looking down, the frozen smile finally cracked, revealing a livid anger beneath. He Jiangwo. Have you thought about the consequences? Do you know this will disrupt the entire company's operations? The stock options of thousands of employees. Do you think the law is your personal playground? That a piece of old paper can overturn 20 years of Mr. Zhao. I cut him off. That piece of paper has your signature on it. 30,000 to buy my father's 35% shares. Marked as a loan. Never paid. When you and my father started the business together, you drew blueprints on the concrete floor, ate boxed meals, slept in the warehouse. Then you built the company alone, and erased your old partner. Mr. Zhao, a man must honor his debts. I gathered the documents from the table, put them back in my briefcase, and zipped it up. The legal process will run its course. I'll see you in court. I turned and walked to the door. Behind me, dead silence. At the threshold, I paused and looked back at the packed conference room. Zhao Tianxiong still stood at the head of the table, hands pressed against it, knuckles white. His lips were pressed into a thin line. In his eyes, anger, shock, and something I'd never seen on his face before, a flicker of panic. Mr. Zhao, that $2 million check, I'll return it next time I see you. I told you I'm not selling. I pulled the door open and walked out. The hallway motion lights came on, illuminating row after row of closed office doors. It was as quiet as if no one was there. My footsteps were silent on the carpet, the elevator. I heard someone behind me. I turned. It was an old accountant from finance. Mr. Zhu in his 50s, usually quiet. He stood at the end of the hall and gave me a thumbs up. Then he turned and walked away. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. I stood alone in that small space, watching the numbers fall from 12. My heart pounded like a drum. A current surged through my chest. Hot and swelling. Spreading to my limbs. First floor. The doors opened. The lobby bustled with people. I walked out. Through the revolving door. The winter wind hit me. Cold against my neck. I stood on the steps and took a deep breath of the crisp air. I'd never felt more awake. My phone buzzed. Joe, bro. I heard. Legend. Then old Sunday Xiao He. Your dad's watching from above. Well done. I didn't reply. I stood on the steps. Looking at the gray-blue sky. Sunlight broke through the clouds and beams. Lighting up puddles on the ground. My phone buzzed again. Grandma. Only 3 words. Come home for dinner. I smiled. Walked down the steps. And headed toward the subway. As I passed the street tree in front of Shengtian headquarters, the wind sent the last few dry leaves spiraling down at my feet. I glanced down, then kept walking. 3 days after the executive meeting. Zhao Tianxiong's special assistant. Mr. Zhou called again. This time his tone was much more direct. No polite preamble. Mr. He. Mr. Zhao would like one final conversation. Location and time. Your choice. No need. I said. Have him talk to my lawyer. A 2-second pause. Then, Mr. He. Mr. Zhao asked me to pass along a message. Some doors. Once opened. Can't be closed again. Think about it. I stood by the office window. Phone in hand. Watching the busy street below. Tell Mr. Zhao this. That door was opened 20 years ago. My father opened it. He just shut it on the wrong person. After I hung up, I could feel the atmosphere shift. First, HR informed me of a system upgrade. My work email was locked. Then at lunch, the cafeteria lady's hand visibly trembled as she served me half the usual portion. In the afternoon, Wang Lei had HR send a transfer notice. The logistics supervisor role was being reorganized. And I was to be reassigned to logistics support in the basement, helping with inventory checks. A lateral move. They called it. The basement had no windows. Fluorescent lights hummed all day. My new desk was in a corner surrounded by dusty boxes. The air smelled of damp mold. When I sat down, the warehouse manager across from me looked up, then back at his records. I took out my laptop, plugged it in. No network. I'd have to use my phone's hotspot. Nobody in support spoke to me, probably under instructions. I didn't care. I wiped the dust off the desk, opened my files, and kept reading. What really got to me was the next afternoon. I got a call from Xiaomon's kindergarten. She hadn't been picked up after school and was waiting at the gate. Grandma was always there by 3:40. Today, she hadn't come. I immediately called Grandma's phone. No answer. Tried the landline. No answer. My mind went blank as I ran. The warehouse guy called after me, but I didn't hear. I rushed out of the building and grabbed a cab home. My palms were drenched in sweat the whole way. When I reached the apartment, I ran up the stairs. Pushing the door open, I found Grandma sitting on the sofa, looking pale. Mom, what happened? Why didn't you answer your phone? She looked up, her lips pale. Zhengwo. This afternoon, someone knocked on the door. Said he was from property management. Asked how many people lived here, what time we usually leave, where the child goes to school. I felt something was off and didn't open the door. He knocked for a while, then left. I called the property office later. They said no one had been sent for a door-to-door survey. She took my hand. Zhengwo. Is someone investigating us? I crouched down and held her thin hand, the veins prominent under her skin. Mom. It's okay. Don't open the door for anyone from now on. I'll pick Xiaoman up myself from now on. She nodded. I helped her to her room to lie down. Then I called Attorney Chun. After I explained, his voice was grave. They're starting to play dirty. Harassing family members is serious. Did you call the police? Not yet. Telling you first. Call the police. And document everything. Time. Place. Description. If this happens again, we can file for a restraining order to stop any further interference. I called the police. Officers came. Took a statement. And reviewed the building and hallway footage. The video showed a man in a cap standing at the door for over 20 minutes, ringing the bell twice, then leaving. The cap was pulled low. Face unidentifiable. I posted about it. Without naming names. On social media. Just that my elderly mother and child had been harassed by an unknown person and that I'd filed a police report. I also sent private messages to a few journalist contacts with a brief summary. That night, a local news account ran a short piece. Shengtian Group equity dispute escalates. Family members allegedly harassed. Within 3 hours, IT had over 100,000 views. The comments overwhelmingly condemned the tactics. The next morning, Shengtian's official public relations account issued a statement condemning false information and asserting lawful compliance. But the top comment below it read, "Then how do you explain the video of Mr. Zhao telling He Jiangwo to resign? Half the company saw it that night." Replies underneath. Screenshots saved. Public sentiment had shifted faster than I'd expected. Zhao Tianxiong probably underestimated how quickly information spreads in the age of social media. And how easily it can spiral out of control. In the past, he'd ruled his circle unchallenged, with everyone around him covering things up. But now a copy of an old agreement, a video of a public humiliation, and a police report about family harassment, all pieced together into a story anyone could understand. On the third day, Shengtian stock fell for 2 consecutive days. Financial media ran features. Shengtian Group founder equity dispute. The full story. Journalists dug up my father's name, He Deming, and traced the founding history from 2 decades ago. The conclusion pointed in one direction. The founding partner was pushed out, and his son had returned for justice. Zhao Tianxiong's team sent attorney Chen a communication, softer this time, officially proposing a negotiated resolution. The terms had changed too. No more $2 million hush checks. They were now willing to make reasonable compensation for the historical equity issue. When attorney Chen forwarded it to me, he said, "Mr. He." Their tone has shifted. Before it was pressure from above. Now it's tentative negotiation. "You've won the first half. How do you want to play the second? Why not letting up?" I said, "They can't flip the table if I hold my ground. Public opinion is on your side. The legal process is moving. They want a graceful exit. You want a full accounting. Mr. He. Now they're in a hurry." Not you. I hung up. I stood in that windowless basement office under the hum of fluorescent lights. I scrolled to Zhao Tianxiong's number. I hesitated for 2 seconds, then didn't call. When he'd pushed my father out, he probably hadn't even given him a proper goodbye. 20 years later, when he wanted me out, his approach was a pre-printed resignation form and a phrase like a turd that won't stick to the wall. Now he wanted a negotiated solution that wanted me to pull out the knife I'd stuck in his back. Pulling a knife out is easy. But a wound doesn't heal overnight. That afternoon, when my father lay in the hospital bed, unable to speak, Zhao Tianxiong was probably in his office reviewing reports. When my mother stood alone at the crematorium, Zhao Tianxiong was probably toasting a client. 20 years. My father swallowed that bitterness for 20 years. I wasn't in a hurry. Let the knife stay a little longer. The extraordinary shareholders meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday in mid-March. The weather that day was exceptional. Early spring sunshine turned the whole city bright. Even the ginkgo trees outside Shengtian headquarters had sprouted tender green buds. I wore a dark suit. On my collar, I pinned an old lapel pin that had belonged to my father. Silvered, simple. A horizontal bar over a vertical one. It was his favorite when he was younger. The edges were a bit worn. But it felt solid and substantial on my lapel. That morning, Grandma straightened my collar, her hands resting on my shoulders, looking at me for a long moment. She said nothing. Xiaoman was about to leave for school, then ran back and stood on tiptoe to kiss my cheek. "Daddy, go get him." I patted her head and let Grandma take her out. I took the subway to the office. Shengtian's entrance was busier than usual. Several cars parked out front, people in formal attire with serious expressions. More security personnel in suits. An extra sign-in table with 2 additional staff checking IDs. I walked in. Someone glanced at my badge. Then whispered to a colleague. I looked at him. And he didn't dare stop me. The meeting was in the top-floor multifunction hall. When I pushed the door open, about half the seats were already filled. The long tables were arranged in a U-shape. Name cards and water glasses in place. I found my seat. Second row on the right. The card read, He Jiangwo, legal shareholder representative. Zhao Tianxiong's seat was at the head of the central table. He wasn't there yet, but his name card and a thermos were on the table. The seats around him gradually filled. I recognized a few faces. Attorney Chen sat in the back row, giving me a slight nod. Old son hadn't come. He'd sent a text that morning. I'm too old for long meetings, but I'm watching the live stream. 9 o'clock. Zhao Tianxiong arrived. He wore a navy suit, white shirt, dark red tie. He walked more slowly than usual. He sat at the head table, scanning the room. His gaze paused on me for a fraction of a second, and then moved on. The meeting proceeded through the agenda. Chairman's address, CFO's annual report, several routine votes. About 40 minutes of procedural formalities. The atmosphere was calmed, as if nothing were happening. But everyone knew what the main course would be. When the agenda reached historical equity dispute, The moderator cleared his throat. Next, we invite the petitioner. Mr. He Jiangwo.to present his equity confirmation claim. Following that, the board's legal counsel will present their due diligence report. After both sides have spoken, the shareholders' meeting will vote on the resolution. I stood up. The room was so quiet I could hear someone rustling papers. I walked to the podium at the side of the head table. I placed a printed copy of my materials on the lectern. Adjusted the microphone. And looked up. Shareholders and directors. I am He Jiangwo. I stand here today not as a Shengtian employee, but as the son of He Deming. My voice echoed in the spacious room. 20 years ago, my father and Mr. Zhao Tianxiong co-founded Shengtian Group. My father built the entire technical framework. He held 35% equity. Mr. Zhao Tianxiong, through a transfer agreement never honored, acquired all my father's shares. The consideration, 30,000 yuan, marked as a loan, never paid. I took out a copy of the yellowed original agreement and held it up. This is the evidence my father left behind. The original has been filed with the court. It bears Mr. Zhao Tianxiong's signature. I placed the copy on the lectern and took out another document. This is a dilution calculation report prepared by an accounting firm. It confirms that the original 35% equity diluted over 20 years corresponds to 8.7% of Shengtian's current total shares. At today's closing price, the equivalent value is $7.3 billion. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the room. I looked at Zhao Tianxiong. He sat at the center table, expressionless, but his hands on the table had curled slightly inward. Zhao Tianxiong's legal counsel rose to respond. Their arguments boiled down to 3 points. Time-barred claims, questionable evidence, and the stability of the current equity structure. Attorney Chen rose to rebut each point with supporting evidence. The back and forth lasted nearly 40 minutes. Finally, the moderator announced the voting period. The voting was quiet. Each person marked their ballot and placed it in the box. I sat in my seat, watching the box slowly fill. Sunlight came through the windows, falling warmly on the red velvet of the ballot box. The count took nearly 20 minutes. The room was silent except for the ticking clock. Zhao Tianxiong kept drinking from his thermos, over and over, more slowly than usual. The moderator stood with the results that cleared his throat. The results of this extraordinary shareholders' meeting are as follows. On the resolution regarding the historical equity dispute, those in favor of supporting the petitioner, He Jiangwo's equity claim under legal procedures represent 67.4% of valid voting rights. Those opposed represent 32.6%. The resolution is passed. I felt my heartbeat, thump, pounding from my chest outward. Zhao Tianxiong sat there, his face like someone had hit pause. His lips moved slightly, then he slowly sank back in his chair. The thermos in front of him sat with its lid half off, and steam rising. The moderator continued. Based on this resolution, the board will coordinate with the petitioner to complete the equity registration change. Additionally, he turned a page. On the special resolution regarding the election of the company's chairman, in favor. 71.2% of valid voting rights. In accordance with the company's bylaws, Mr. Zhao Tianxiong shall no longer serve as chairman of Shengtian Group. Effective immediately. 2 seconds of silence. Then scattered applause. Then more. And more. Zhao Tianxiong slowly rose from his seat. He looked at me. That look that I'd waited 20 years to see it. In it, anger. Disbelief. And the bewilderment of someone whose world had been completely overturned. He opened his mouth as if to speak. But nothing came out. He picked up his thermos from the table. Turned. And walked out through the side door. The door closed behind him. Thump. Not loud. But enough. I stood by the lectern. Still gripping the old agreement. Sunlight fell on those yellowed pages. Illuminating every crease and fold. The vote my father never lived to see. 20 years later. His son was there for it. After the meeting. I stood in the hallway for a while. Many people passed by. Some nodded at me. Some patted my shoulder. Some just looked at me a little longer. I wrapped my coat tighter and walked to the stairwell. I descended one floor at a time. The motion lights flickering on and off. My footsteps echoing in the empty space. When I reached the ground floor lobby. My phone buzzed. A voice message from Grandma. I opened it. Xiaomon's voice. Clear and crisp. Daddy. Did you win? Are we celebrating tonight? I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Looking at the sun-drenched street. My fingers shook as I typed. It took 2 tries to send. We won. Sweet and sour ribs tonight. A moment later. Another voice message. I opened it. Her little voice yelled, "Yay, Daddy's the best." I slipped my phone back in my pocket and pushed through the revolving door. The sunlight was warm on my face. Spring had truly come. The day the equity registration change was finalized, I walked out of the lawyer's office with a thin confirmation letter in hand. It read, He Jiang Wo that having followed due process. Is hereby confirmed as a legal shareholder of Xingtian Group. Shareholding ratio, 8.7%. The paper was light, but it felt heavy in my palm, like holding 20 years of weight. I took a cab back to the old house. Passing Xingtian headquarters. I asked the driver to slow down. I rolled down the window and looked up. The blue ring of lights on the roof was invisible in the daylight, but the building itself stood there, its glass curtain wall gleaming. I thought of 20 years ago when it was first built, my father sitting on the old sofa reading the newspaper story. He was silent for a long time, then turned the page and kept reading. He said nothing, but only now did I understand that silence. The cab turned into the old neighborhood, the streets narrowed. Small shops lined both sides. Someone hanging quilts, someone repairing an e-bike. The familiar scent of everyday life drifted in. I got out at the lane entrance and walked in. I paused beneath the old locust tree, thicker now than before, with deep cracks in its bark. I reached out and touched it. Rough, scratchy. I walked up the stairs and pushed open the door. Grandma was busy in the kitchen. Xiaoman was at the coffee table drawing. She looked up when I came in, holding up her picture. Daddy. I drew our family. It was 3 figures. A large adult silhouette. A small one beside it. And another taller silhouette farther away. The taller one had a mess of squiggles on its head. Hair. Who's this? I crouched down. That's Grandpa. She pointed at the squiggly mess. Grandma says Grandpa had a lot of hair. Like a lion. I paused. Looking at the drawing. Xiaoman had never met her grandfather. He was gone before she was born. But the figure she'd drawn, tall, wild-haired, overlapped with my memory of him in that last winter, sitting in the armchair in the sun. I touched her head, then walked into the kitchen. Grandma was stir-frying. Oil sizzling. Scallions filling the room with their fragrance. She didn't turn around. Just asked, "You're back? Back? Everything done? Everything done?" Her spatula paused for a moment, then continued. "Then your father's matter settled. Zhao Tianxiong was removed. The shares are back. Dad's name is back on the original founders list." Her back trembled slightly. She reached up and wiped her face, then kept stir-frying. Her voice was a little hoarse. Good, good. Eat. I made your father's favorite braised pork. Have some extra for him, a tea dinner." Xiaoman chattered about school, how her desk mate had lost his eraser, how her teacher had praised her drawing. Grandma put a piece of braised pork in her bowl. She ate it with shiny, greasy lips. I sat across from them, watching. Light filtered through the cracks in the old window frame, scattering gold across the table. After dinner, I cleared the dishes. Xiaoman watched cartoons in the living room. Grandma sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, squinting at the gray-blue sky like a quiet silhouette. I went into the bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer, and took out the iron box. I looked through each item again. The agreement, the photo, the bank receipt, the manuscript. I picked up the yellowed photo. My father and Zhao Tianxiong with their arms around each other at the shabby factory entrance, both grinning bright in the sun. I turned it over. On the back, written lightly in pencil. Old Zhao. One day. Our factory will be the biggest in the country. He. Spring 97. My father's handwriting. He rarely wrote such bold claims, steady. Soft-spoken. But when he wrote that line, he genuinely believed the man whose arm was around his shoulder would make it to the end with him. I looked at those words for a long time. Then I put the photo back in the box and closed the lid. I slid the iron box back into the nightstand drawer. I didn't lock it. From that day on, I established a charitable foundation. I named it the Deming Foundation. After my father. The initial funding came from a portion of the equity I'd recovered. It was specifically designated to support the education of children from single-parent families. I didn't know anything about running a foundation. I hired professionals. My only role was to show up once a year to tell a story and hand out backpacks. The first event, about 30 children came, at the youngest 4 or 5, at the oldest 12 or 13. A little boy sat in the last row, head down, afraid to meet anyone's eyes. His mother stood outside the classroom in a faded coat, red-eyed. At the end, she came over and thanked me. Twice. The third time, her voice broke. I told her. My daughter's also from a single-parent family. It'll be okay. Things get better. She pressed her lips together and nodded, then walked away with her son. That night that I got home, Xiaoman was already asleep. I sat on the living room couch, pulled out the old agreement, and looked at it again. Not at the terms, just at my father's signature. He Deming. 3 characters, written just like him. Steady, stroke by stroke, no frills. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a voice message I'd saved for years. The last message my father sent me, a month before he died. His voice was already weak. He had to pause for breath between words. Only 7 seconds, he said. Jangwo, Dad's things. They'll be yours eventually. 7 seconds. I'd listened to it more times than I could count. Each time, I felt something different. Before I thought he meant the old computer, the books, the little money he'd left. Now I knew that he meant the papers in that iron box. The breath he'd held. The unfinished work of his life. Now it was done. I locked my phone and put it down. I stood and walked to the balcony. The spring night wind was warm against my face. The locust tree below had sprouted a layer of tender green leaves, glowing softly in the streetlight. In the distance, the city skyline was outlined by thousands of lights stretching to the horizon. The blue ring atop Shengtian headquarters still glowed, but it had a new owner now. The new management had sent me an email last week inviting me to participate in strategic planning as a shareholder. I'd replied that I was focusing on philanthropic work for the time being. I didn't say much more. Everything in that building. It was time to turn the page. I walked back inside. Xiaoman's door was open a crack. I gently pushed it open. She lay askew, hugging her blanket. 1 foot kicked out. I tucked her foot back in and pulled the blanket up. She mumbled something in her sleep, rolled over, and drifted back into deep slumber. I stood by her bed for a long time. Moonlight slipped through the curtain gap, falling quietly on her face. 20 years ago, when my father lay in his hospital bed unable to speak, he must have looked at me the same way. He saw a young man who understood nothing, with so much left unsaid. Now I understood. I understood it all. I went back to my room and sat in the chair by the window. On my desk lay a book, Deming Foundation, inaugural commemorative volume. I opened the first page. A black and white photo of my father as a young man, standing at a warehouse entrance. Smiling, I placed the book in the most visible spot on my desk. Then I turned off the light. Outside, the night was gentle. Spring had colored everything with warmth. Tomorrow, I'd have to get Xiaoman to school early. The new nanny wouldn't start until next week. Grandma's back had been hurting lately. I needed to take care of things at home first. There were a few foundation documents to sign. Shengtian's new chairman had asked to meet next week to discuss cooperation. His tone on the phone had been very polite. There was much to do. But every thread was laid out clearly before me, each one's path plain to see. Not like that night at the banquet, when I'd crouched before the closet to open the iron box, my heart full of ash. Now the things in that box had lit every lamp. I lay down, closed my eyes. Outside, the tree shadows swayed gently, whispering, like someone speaking softly. The sound was so light, so warm, like it came from very far away, yet also right beside me. Jangwo, Dad's things. They'll be yours eventually, yeah? I got them. That osmanthus tree was planted by my father when he was young, in the southwest corner of the old courtyard. The first time Xiaoman saw it after moving in, she was barely 4. She looked up and asked, "Why is this tree so tall?" I said, "Because Grandpa planted it many years ago." She reached out and hugged the trunk. Her little arms couldn't reach around, only half the way. This spring, when she hugged it again, her fingertips met. She ran back inside, beaming. "Daddy, I've grown. I can hold Grandpa's tree now." In the second autumn of the foundation, I set up a table in the old courtyard and invited Old Sun and Attorney Fong for dinner. Old Sun walked around the yard first, standing under the locust tree for a while, then sat down and drank my tea. "This tree's older than Shengtian Group," he said. "This is where your father and Zhao Tianxiong had their argument." He told me a detail I'd never heard. In the autumn of 98, my father and Zhao Tianxiong stood under that tree, facing each other. My father held the transfer agreement. Zhao Tianxiong stood 3 paces away. My mother was cooking inside. Through the window, she saw them talking for a long time, not loudly. But she caught Zhao's last words. "He Deming, don't be ungrateful." That night, my father came home very late. He sat in the courtyard alone until dawn. When I got up for school, he'd already left for work. Hanging among the branches of the tree was a broken osmanthus sprig, limp and wilted, It be why the time old sun finished the story that the sky was darkening. The courtyard was bathed in warm orange light. The osmanthus leaves swayed in the evening breeze. The tiny buds hidden in the foliage hadn't opened yet, but the air already held a faint sweetness. Xiaoman ran out with a plate of fruit, set it on the table, and handed a slice of watermelon to old Sunday. Grandpa Sunday, eat some watermelon. He took it, chuckling, and patted her head. You look just like your grandfather did as a child. He took a bite, then turned to me. If your father could see today, how wonderful that would be. I didn't respond. I took a sip of tea. It was Iron Buddha, my father's favorite. Bitter on the tongue, slow to turn sweet. When dinner was over, old Sun stood to leave. I walked him to the lane entrance. On the way, he patted my shoulder. Have you heard any news about Zhao Tianxiong lately? Not really. His wife sold their downtown house last month. Moved to a small county down south. I heard he's running a tiny trading company now. All those people who used to circle around him, none are left. Last week he called me. Cried for half a minute. Didn't say a word. Just cried. I stood under the streetlight at the lane entrance. The warm yellow light stretched our shadows long. In the distance, dogs barked, children laughed, and the smell of cooking drifted through the air that mixed with osmanthus sweetness. Uncle Sunday. Do you think he deserves to cry? Old Sun looked at me, the moonlight deepening his wrinkles. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, your father never cried. He only cried twice in his life, once when you were born, and once before he died, when he saw your graduation certificate. Zhao Tianxiong, what he owes your father, crying won't pay back. I nodded. Old Sun turned and walked away, his silhouette shrinking into the darkness under the distant streetlight. When I got back, Xiaoman was chasing a firefly in the courtyard, giggling. Grandma sat on the porch in the wicker chair, picking vegetables, a radio playing scratchy opera in the background. I cleared the dishes from the table and took them to the kitchen. Halfway through washing, my phone buzzed. Attorney Fong, confirming the foundation's compliance documents were cleared and the official opening could happen next week. I replied good and set the phone aside, continuing to wash. The water ran, foam sliding from my fingers and swirling in the sink. When I finished, I dried my hands and walked back out. Xiaoman had caught the firefly and was showing it off. Its light pulsed in her palm. Daddy, look. Isn't it like a star? I crouched and looked at the tiny glow in her hand, bright, then dim, like breathing. Let it go, I said. Its mom is probably looking for it. She hesitated, then opened her palm. The firefly rose, tracing a small arc through the air, and drifted into the osmanthus branches. The light fell on the leaves, making them glow green. Xiaoman watched for a long time, then tugged my finger. Daddy, can Grandpa see us? I followed her gaze to the tree. The wind moved the crown gently. The osmanthus buds between the leaves trembled. In 2 weeks they'd bloom. Yes, I said. She thought for a moment, then nodded solemnly. She ran back inside to find Grandma. I stood alone in the courtyard. Moonlight cast the osmanthus tree's shadow on the ground, its intertwined branches forming a quiet painting. I stood there for a long time. The night wind carried the scent of earth and grass. The city's distant hum was faintly audible, but in this yard, everything was slow, still. The locust tree, the osmanthus tree, the wicker chair under the porch, the radio's intermittent opera, everything in its place, that like time had flowed through and taken nothing away. I turned off the porch light, leaving only the glow from inside. From Xiaoman's room came Grandma's voice reading a story, a little rabbit finding its way home. I sat in the wicker chair, looked up at the night sky. There weren't many stars, but a few were visible, shining faintly, like the ones my father pointed out when I was young. He said stars take years for their light to reach us. What we see is always the past. I miss my father. But that missing didn't hurt anymore. It was like the osmanthus tree's roots, deep in the earth, invisible, but they're steady, supporting all the branches that grew. Next spring the osmanthus would bloom again, and Xiaoman would probably be able to wrap her arms around the tree.